Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief DeRousse from Everett PD, 30.5 years experience in law enforcement. I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief DeRousse. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Of course. Give us a little bit of background. 30.5 years. Did you always want to be in law enforcement, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I did. My first memories of my dad were he was a military police officer, and I remember him coming home in his police uniform with his gun belt. In fact, I wore his gun belt the first few years on the job. It was an old leather one, so eventually technology passed it by, and I got a nylon belt now. But yeah, I used to love seeing him come home and rushing to greet him, and then as time went on, maybe partly because of that, or just because I don't know, I get tired of some of the stories about people being victimized. I thought it was a great career path. So from a young age, I wanted to get into law enforcement.
Because you had that experience of looking up to your dad and feeling like you wanted to be that, do you feel like you ever felt that way in your career when you're walking around? Do you ever feel like you knew that you had the ability to inspire young people?
I think it came eventually. I think every young cop, new cop, thinks that they're going to make a difference every day. And one of the first things you have to come to grips with is that it's not every day. You know, some days it's just busy work, but then it becomes like a few times a month or, multiple times a year, but not every day. And then as you do it longer and longer, you start running into people that you have impacted in some way, and they come running up to you. Sometimes you don't even remember who they were.
Yeah.
And they tap you on the shoulder. Maybe they even look different, right? Somebody that you drove to jail and you had a really hard but tough love type conversation with them, and they get clean. Let's say they're addicted to drugs and they get clean and they want to come over. They want to tell you and they want to share that it was that conversation that you barely remember on the way to the jail that made the difference. And that's when you know how powerful this job is and how much impact you can have on people.
And I would imagine that it makes all the other days worthwhile in a sense.
It does. I mean, sometimes, the job has lots of incidents where you get muck all over yourself and that's impacting you long term. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 or multiple of those good incidents to try to battle against those things that really hurt your heart or made you feel vulnerable or whatever.
Yeah. I love that you use the word muck. I think it's such a good descriptive word, and it makes complete sense. Like, I can see that when you say that. I know you've been in this career a long time. What muck has gotten on you throughout your career?
Geez. Sometimes you push it to some weird place, right? That you don't ever really deal with it. Sometimes you can remember it, or somebody will bring up a call. I mean, there's been so many, and I've been friends with people that have killed themselves that were police officers. I've had officers that I knew personally killed in the line of duty, through homicide. Somebody shot them. And, all that stuff weighs on you. Everybody knows that when you sign up that this is stuff, at least you think that this is stuff that you're going to be exposed to. You don't realize. And in that muck, it's almost like somebody described it one time as coats of paint, right? It's coat after coat after coat. It's slowly changing you. You don't even realize it. The other description I hear a lot is the frog in the water that gets turned up, right? And it's now boiling and the frog doesn't know well enough to get out. It's like every retired person I talk to, I see them a year later and they look 10 years younger and healthier because you're carrying around this muck. And, the only time you really get to shed it is one of two ways. One is that you retire, or two, you build up some really strong resiliency and coping methods, and you surround yourself with people that are doing the same thing.
I've never heard the paint analogy, and I like that one too, because I think you can visualize that, and that makes complete sense. How do you think that you can prepare for that? I know you said that you think that you're coming to this career and maybe you think you understand the realities, but maybe don't quite understand it until you're in the thick of it. Do you think that you can prepare for that proactively, or do you think that you have to almost learn as you go to be able to handle it after the fact?
I think you can. And I think good departments should be helping young police officers understand what they're getting into. I don't know you totally know, unless you're in a law enforcement family, sometimes you'll have that inside scoop.
Yeah.
But one of the questions we ask in our police interview, the chief's interview, which is the last one before you get hired, is sometimes we ask them, do you know what you're getting into? right? And we spend a lot of time talking about the value of, having strong support systems and friends that are outside the career. The problem is most time these are young men and women. And like when I started when I was 22, okay, yeah, I can
Right.
handle it, no problem. And then you just go charging in. And then you realize somewhere along the way, it's this magic time. It's like the 5 to 7 year mark when you start feeling the impacts of that muck and the job. You start getting a real disgruntled. You start looking like every cop you've ever seen, arms crossed, grumpy face. Um, that in general can bug the general public, that don't know. Doesn't bug me as much. I speak cop. I know how to get through that,
Mm.
right? But and that's why we've started developing more things today than we've ever had before to try to help mitigate the impacts of that job on individuals so that they can survive a career in law enforcement.
Yeah. I think anyone listening to this can deeply relate to being young and, I don't want to say immature. I don't want to say that. I'll speak for myself. I think I was definitely young and immature, and I definitely thought I knew everything. And I think there were a lot of things that I could have avoided if I would have listened to people who had more experience than me and maybe who had been through it. But I do see what you're saying, that when you're young, sometimes you feel invincible. You feel like you don't need the things. And it's not until, you're in that moment where you're like, oh no, I see it now. Now I feel like I get what everyone else was saying, but I didn't understand it before this moment. You said that you don't know that the job is changing you maybe right away. And then you said like 5, 7 years in, you kind of get to that point where you're a little disgruntled. What are some of the signs you think you can look for that you are maybe changing a little bit because of the job?
Well, I think the people that you're closest to, and hopefully there's people outside the job, tap you on the shoulder and ask you what's the matter. I mean, the people that you were going home to, sometimes a spouse or significant other, or a mom, some other loved one, somebody else you trust, is notices the differences and says something. The problem is you don't, right? And you either don't believe them. Hopefully you do, but you don't believe them, or you stop being around them as much, right? And the signs, some of the signs to me are very obvious, and it has only been in the last maybe third of my career that it became so obvious that it's definitely this job. I meet and talk and spend time interacting with brand new cops who want to take on the world and fix everything and go out and change the world every day in a positive way. And then I see them 5 years later when they've seen this terrible side of humanity, and it's impossible not to have a tour of duty every day in the middle of all that and not be impacted in some way.
Yeah.
And it just happens. And so we've done a lot of things here at Everett PD to try to address that and mitigate it. I think it's impossible what we ask the men and women to do. I mean, they're true heroes. What we ask them to do every day, knowing it's going to impact them, is akin to sending people off to war. It's gonna change them, right? And it's hard for me to do it. I only do it because I know there's a greater good, and that's to protect the weak from those that might want to take advantage of them.
Yeah. You had used the word resilient and resiliency. What is your definition of resiliency, and how do you train that? How do you teach that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you have to train resiliency. We use the word a lot, and I think it's the underlying driver for why we train. When I think of resiliency, I think about getting back to your baseline, right? To the extent you can. I'm big on analogies. Obviously, you've heard a few already, but it's that hanger that you bend one way, right? You bend the wire, right? And you bend it back. You bend it again. And that hanger represents the officer that's out there dealing with whatever that traumatic or sometimes not so traumatic incident. And what you hope is you can always bend it back and it doesn't break, right? Mm-hmm. So I think of resiliency is trying to keep people at a baseline, so maybe not bend it in the first place, and then worrying a lot less about it breaking to the point where it no longer functions, right? And we're seeing more and more of that for all kinds of reasons.
I'm like cheesing because that is basically my exact definition of resiliency as well. It's how quickly can you get back to baseline, and I think that, of course, if you can stay on baseline, that's ideal, right? We want to try to stay as level as possible, but also understanding that there are times we're human. There are times where there's going to be peaks and valleys in our life, and there's going to be ebbs and flows of, how we respond to things. But I think that if we can try to stay level as much as we can, and then keep going, don't stop, keep going and stay level. So I completely 100% on board with that definition. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think there's a weird, and there's probably some scientific words that are about better than the ones I'm about to use, but there's this weird way that things impact people. I got into shooting myself years and years ago, and it was something I had prepared for my whole career. I'm gonna get into shooting. I know I am. I want to perform at a high level. With somebody with a gun that had just shot at some people. I chased them through a grocery store. My partner's not far behind me. She was in another car, but we got in pursuit of this guy, and then we chased him through the grocery store, get out the back end. I fire at this guy multiple times, hit him a couple times, non-fatal, take him into custody, and then my partner comes running up about the same time. And I was fine with it. Like, it wasn't impactful to me because it was a big event, and it just didn't bug me because I had mentally prepared for it, right?
Yeah.
But it significantly impacted my partner. Like, she was really upset, and it was not because of the traumatic incident. It was because she felt like she let me down. Right? She was really impacted by that. So what I was kind of getting at there, as far as scientific words, I feel like in the policing profession, because you're so inundated with so many things, it's the little things sometimes they get through because you've already prepared these barriers and processed the things that would be huge, that would 100% impact you. Seeing blood, seeing a dead person, whatever it is, right? But then, your partner lets you down in some case, or you name it. You don't get the training that you thought you should get, and if you hear somebody overhear somebody talking about you that's also wearing a badge, right? The people that impact you the most, and all of a sudden you're feeling it, right? You're starting to feel it, but you'd never prepared for that, right? So sometimes it's the littlest things that get to you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important reminder. And I appreciate you saying that, because I think we forget about that. And I think it's also like compounding, it's not just work stuff, it's also home stuff. And eventually, like you said, it becomes overwhelming, and maybe something you didn't think was going to impact you will. And I don't know if you can prepare for everything in advance. I don't, like, every little thing that you could possibly think of that could possibly impact you. I don't know if you can proactively prepare for everything. And I think that that's where the importance of both proactive and reactive measures comes into place, because if and when something does impact you, we got you. We got you on the back end. How can we prepare you as proactively as possible? But then if and when the inevitable happens and something does impact you, we have something on the back end to support you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it doesn't make as much sense preparing for everything because you never can. Mm-hmm. It makes a lot more sense for preparing for when you start feeling, hey, that impacted me. Being self-aware, right? That's a huge piece of it.
Yeah. And I think that's another whole nother rabbit hole that we can go down, is like, how do you teach emotional intelligence? How do you teach self-awareness? I think that that's a question mark that a lot of leadership has. It's like, how do you teach that self-assessment? How do you teach people to assess those things in other people too?
Yeah, and that may be impossible. I mean, I think that's probably maybe the most difficult thing we can do. Yeah. It's taken me decades in my job to take that pause at the end of a real terrible call and take a breath and be like, man, that impacted me. I'm flexing right now. That is really weird. Or my legs tapping at a higher rate than normal. Years and years ago, a canine officer we had gets in a head-on collision with a person trying to flee a burglary. And I was a new sergeant at the time, and we go flying out there. She's trapped in the car. The car catches on fire. Another friend of mine who is working, he's trying to get her out of the car and cutting seatbelts, and all the things that no human being should have to do. And it appears to him that our mutual friend, is on fire, right? And officers are rushing up and putting the fire out, and she gets airlifted out of there. And I remember driving back to the precinct and backing into a park. I mean, I was Johnny on the spot, literally, I guess, Johnny on the spot, dealing with the call, and had signed up to be in that crisis and handle calls, handle everything that's happening, and high functioning. But I remember backing into a parking spot at the precinct and just letting the tears come, right? And just be like, okay, that was a terrible event. and recognizing my first step in healing that day was recognizing how terrible it was and allowing myself in a moment out of public's eye to be a human being.
Wow.
We have to, again, I keep using the word humanity lately because that's what's the hardest part of the job is seeing how inhumane a small portion of our world can be,
Mm.
and just trying to live within that without getting too much of that muck on me.
Yeah, I find to be really interesting as I think that a lot of the conversations I have kind of have themes sometimes. It's almost like we're all going through similar things together without actually knowing it, like all really interconnected. And I had someone say that vulnerability is a sign of humanity, and that we're human. And I really liked that because I think you have to, in some way, have that vulnerability and soften for a moment to understand that you are human and there's no way that that would not impact you. And when I was going through some of my hardest times in my life and, trying not to deal with the things and shoving everything down, I remember how, like, it, and I only know this now because I know the opposite. And I think sometimes you have to have two sides of the coin, but I remember how hardened I felt. And it was by design, right? It was like trying to build this impenetrable wall. It was trying to make sure nothing's going to impact me. I'm good. We're good. Everything's good. And the moment that you give yourself permission to be human and to soften a little bit, I don't mean like be weak or whatever these words are, but just like take a breath and just like sit there and be like, wow, okay, like that does impact me. And how can I take that weight off of me? Like, what can I do so that I don't have this feeling of being so hardened? And I don't think I knew I felt that way. And I felt like that for a very, very long time. And it wasn't until those moments of like self-reflection that you start to understand how you felt before that.
It's so counterintuitive, right? You
Mm-hmm.
want to be strong. You think you should be strong, right? Um, I don't know if you've read much of Brene Brown, but she's pretty good at defining vulnerability and
Yeah.
how to navigate through it. And it was like epiphany time when I either listened to her YouTube thing that went viral or read one of her books. But it's there's the right time to do it though. I would never encourage officers to go to roll call and start talking about how vulnerable they are. There's also a nuance there. I just went on a pretty good guys trip, guys I've known on the job for, some of them 20 plus years. And, we go and smoke cigars and, having some adult beverages. But what it's turned into is a real opportunity for us to be vulnerable with each other as well in the midst of all the fun. And I feel very healed when I come back from it because I get to talk about what my burdens are as a chief. They talk about theirs in whatever part of the organization they're in. And it just reinforces exactly what you just said, is that, sometimes that's a good thing.
I think there's so much power in community and conversations. And I think we're starting to understand that now. And, I know that you maybe grew up in an environment in your earlier policing days that it wasn't talked about. Wellness wasn't maybe widely accepted. It really was that mentality of, posture up and keep going and don't talk about it. And I know that you told me offline that, through your career and some of your personal experiences that you started to understand that there has to be a better way to address wellness. And you used another analogy that I really liked. You said it had to be a shotgun approach. Can you explain a little bit about how you came to that understanding and what does a shotgun approach look like to you?
Yeah, I think a lot of times in policing, cops think there's one best way to do something, right? But when it comes to human beings, we have all types of men and women that work here, right? And every one of them deals with the impacts of the profession in different ways. So the hardest thing for a police leader that really cares, that truly cares, right, about the people that do the job, is there's no and the one that knows that there's no right way to help somebody through their pain or help them develop the resiliency that works for them or whatever you're trying to do to improve their mental health. And there's no easy way. You have to take a shotgun approach, which feels weird because a lot of us, well, I'll just say me, I try to help others in the way that would work for me, and that doesn't always work. So then
Yeah.
you find yourself doing so many different things, and sometimes that annoys some of your staff, And I'll just give you one example. When we had an officer killed in the line of duty, I was spending a lot of time calling and checking up people on that with people on that crew, just seeing how you doing, how are things going. It irritated the piss out of one guy so much that he called me out on it. He goes, "I don't need this kind of help or this level of help." I know he didn't mean it in a negative way, because it was not the way I would have wanted to help. I felt I totally resonated with what he was saying, but there were other people on that crew that did want that level of attention, right? So you have to try to find the best way to help each person in a way that works for them. So when it comes to like programs, you have to have various programs, some which your staff will use and some which they won't. A few years ago, we started 2 free therapy visits a year. We went out and actually vetted therapists that had some understanding of law enforcement. We worked out a process that we in administration would never know who it was. All we would know is like 5 people used this service this month. And we utilized our health management company to scrub the names. They're the ones, they reported it back to us. They understood HIPAA very well, so they knew that they weren't going to share any names. And that was just one option. And then try to encourage people to go do that, right? Some people, therapy is not for them. They want something different.
Yeah.
So you have to, and I guess maybe most important, because I mean, I'm not doing all this work myself, is to have people that you can lean on to do it. So we used to have a position that was pretty much, and still do, assigned to our peer support team. So we have a peer support team, but we also started through a grant, hired a wellness coordinator, and she's been just crushing it. And she's the one that really understands the opportunity in a shotgun approach where you're constantly looking for different ways to help people get exposed to healthy habits or resiliency. She got a nutritionist to come in so they can eat better. She's helping buy new gym equipment so people can get whatever workout is they want. And I mean, what else is it? She just had a seminar this week on financial investments to make sure that we're financially healthy, because that's a big stressor for people.
Yeah.
And it's that type of approach that, you just assume, you hope that a couple of the things you do work for, it may be different for each different cop, but a couple of each of those things maybe works for them, and they use it to improve, where they're at as far as their mental health and wellness.
Yeah. I used to call it the charcuterie board. Like lots of different little things, and you can take what you want, leave what you don't. And I was at a conference and I had someone come up to me and they're like, "That is too hard to say. You have to say buffet." And I was like, okay, whatever works for you, charcuterie board, buffet, shotgun method. But I agree with you. I think having lots of different options and lots of ways to also present these options and explain the importance of these options, because I think that, to your point, you almost have to learn how to do things 100 different ways, in order because we know this, and it's a leadership skill. It's a communication skill where you have to learn how to teach one thing 10 different ways, because there's going to be one thing that you say that resonates with someone, and what resonates with that person is not going to resonate with the next person. And I think that that's an incredibly challenging feat. But I really appreciate that you recognize that, and it's not a blanketed approach. It's not a one size fits all. It's like, how can we make sure that each individual within the organization feels valued and supported as an individual?
Yeah. And it's work. It's work. I mean, and in public safety, in the public sector, you get paid every 2 weeks the amount, same no matter what. So when I hear from people from other departments be like, our chief doesn't do that, or our command staff doesn't do that, I kind of understand. It's because they're going to get paid the same, and they may have an old school mentality of rub some dirt on it, get back in the fight, right? But to me, I've seen enough people's careers end, or them lose a marriage, right? Or be estranged from a family member, a kid or something, that it's worth it. To me, what the payment is in somebody coming and walking my door and saying, "Hey, I need some help," that they trust me enough as chief to get them off to the whatever service they need.
Yeah. How do you build that trust? I know, and for anyone who's listening, you have an organization that's fairly large. You have over 250 employees. And I know that you're really intentional about trying to stay connected with them. And I'm really curious of how you do that in such a big organization, some of the strategies that you have for building that culture and that trust.
Yeah, I don't know if I started doing all this because it was about trust, or just because I always wished as I came up in the organization that I had a little bit of a glimpse and understanding of how the chief worked. Very few people will have an opportunity to interact with the chief if he or she sits in their office and never engages. And I understand why they would do that, because you can't see my desk, but there's piles of work on it, right? So very early on, as I got into senior leadership, I started finding ways to actively engage. And there's two maybe that I want to talk about. One is that I'd get in the car with them. I'd let them know, or I'd let their sergeant know, hey, I want to come out and ride for a few hours, and I'd like to ride with this officer. They'll know if their schedule allows that, or if they're wrapped up in something else. So, and they get out there, and the first 20, 30 minutes, they're sitting with good posture, hands at 10 and 2, really super uncomfortable. And I purposely don't even talk. I just kind of let the moment sit there and let them get used to me being in the car with them. Almost every time I've done it, and I've done it, 50 plus times probably, but almost every time I do it, eventually they relax. Eventually we end up having a pretty good conversation and I ask a lot of questions about them personally and professionally. Where are you at? Where are you living? How's the family? What are your kids' names? Those types of things. And again, it's not contrived. I really want to know these things, but I recognized early on too that connection made it a lot easier for them to understand that the decisions that are being made by the department aren't being made with some type of evil intent. The conversation that occurs around the water cooler, the conspiracy theorists love to come and make up things that aren't entirely accurate. But that means that this is a big part of building trust. That means that I have to even have the tough conversations while I'm sitting in that car.
Yeah.
I realize that decision, this is me talking to them, right? I realize that decision didn't impact you very well. And I'm sorry for that. But here's how it impacted the organization. And here's why we did it, right? And is there other ways to have done it? Probably. But I wanted you to hear from me exactly what I was thinking when I made that call.
Yeah.
So that's one way. And it's turned, I think it's generated some really good relationships with staff that when I walk through the precinct, they truly engage with me in ways. And that trust, I think, again, when it comes back to the wellness of the officer, I think employees are healthier when they believe that their organization cares about them, right? And I do, but I can't just sit up here and hope that they do understand that. I have to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I do a lot is I send text messages to their personal phones. Not work related. I guess technically it kind of could be, but just checking in with them on a variety of things. How you feeling? We have a recap system where calls of consequence, and maybe some that aren't that big of a deal, get shared via email through a program we have. And if it's a tough call, I'll text the officer. This is John DeRousse on my personal cell. Read the recap. Just wanted to let you know that sounded like a pretty tough call, right? And sometimes they don't get back to me. It's funny. I'm saying this. If anybody watches this, they think I'm talking about them, but I've done this so often. It's really about everybody. But a lot of times, sometimes they won't get back to me, and that's okay. I'm not needing that, but I want them to as they're driving through their day, somewhere in their subconscious, I want them to be thinking about, man, that was a tough call, and man, our chief does care about us, right?
Yeah.
And I am valued, and if that helps them, then great. And if it doesn't, I didn't have much to lose.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you said everyone wants to feel valued, because I agree. I think that if we're going to recognize that we're all human, there's no one that I've ever talked to that's like, yeah, I don't want to feel valued. I don't want my organization or my family or, whoever to make me feel valued, So I think that you're spot on with that. And I love that you make an effort to humanize yourself. I think that we talk a lot about that, right? About like humanizing the badge, and especially in the context of for the community, right? For them to understand that you're people. But I think within the organization, humanizing yourself as leadership. And it's funny because when you were telling that story about, like really tense, like hands on the wheel, like looking straight forward. That is how I felt when I started this podcast, if I'm being completely honest with you. If you go back to like some of my first ones, I was like so rigid, like I'm so nervous to talk to you guys. And, this was a concept of mine that I was like, I can't believe that you guys want to talk to me and like talk about wellness. This is so cool, but I'm so nervous. And, as things go on, you do start to see the human element of it. And I think that's the best part. That is the coolest part, is being able to connect with people and get to know each other for not just the things that you're doing at work, but things that are happening in your lives, and, being able to have deep conversations with people. I think that's what this whole experience is all about. It's about connection and community. And I think that that's really cool that you make that effort. And I would imagine that that's appreciated, even if it's a little bit nerve wracking. I wanted to ask you, because kind of going back to what you said before about, there might be other leaders out there that have still that mentality of get up, get back out there, stay in the fight. How do you balance empathy with accountability?
Oh, that's tough. Um, I think there's an old military motto. The actual words are, the men, or the mission, the men, and then me. There's a pecking order of how you take care of things. And I think for the most part, I mean, I really care about the people that work here, but we have a mission, right? And when we sign up, we all recognize that the mission comes first. And I think this happens as a parent as well. Sometimes you provide that tough love. I mentioned that earlier. Provide that tough love that really is about the betterment either of the whole or a betterment of the person that you're dealing with, right? So I think that a lot of times when people get promoted, they lose friends in the organization because either the person or the friends think you can't be both, right? You can't be a friend and you can't be somebody that has to provide direction and sometimes hold people accountable for what they're doing or not doing. But I think for the most part, I can wear both hats, and that comes with a lot of honesty and a lot of communication, sometimes over communication about why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Some of the texts that I was talking about earlier, I've sent those texts to officers that I've given days off without pay, and just saying, this is, you got through this. You may have, we're a department of second chances. We're holding you accountable for what you did, but you're valued here, and that, and it's heartfelt. Like I don't do it because I'm angry most of the time at the person. I mean, you'd have to do a pretty evil mistake for me to be angry at you. But what's really important in modern law enforcement, probably anything, but in modern law enforcement, is that we already have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We have to really run a tight ship when it comes to how we do this job. And to do that, you got to be careful when people get off into the weeds, right? And if they get off track, not only do you have to worry about what that can cause, you got to worry about how that impacts everybody else that sees that.
Yeah. Whether
it's a community that starts to have trust issues with law enforcement, or their coworkers that like, why am I not off in the weeds if that person's not being held accountable? So I think honestly, the balance is, for me, is maybe easier than others because I put them really close together on the scale. Sometimes empathy is about holding somebody accountable. And having dealt with a lot of people with addiction issues in my life, personally and professionally, I think that's another area, and cops are prone to drink for sure. That's another area where you have to sometimes have really tough conversations because you care about them, because you're worried about where it might end up. And in today's world, it's really hard because there's been such a focus on wellness in the last 10 plus years that I think that there's also a very small portion of our department or departments, police departments, that take advantage of the wellness. They go out on wellness related issues, but maybe don't have the same challenges, problems, et cetera, that the people that really need it are having. And I find that actually, in a weird way, I find that impacting our officer wellness, because I hear around the water cooler and other conversations that one officer's mad at another officer because they think they're abusing their leave related to wellness, right? And so because it's become so prominent, you're always going to have people that are going to be like, okay, I'm using that. And then I think sometimes staff sit and wonder, like, why aren't you doing something about this? They're obviously abusing the sick leave policy. And my answer is almost always, if I start doing that, people will care less about taking care of the things they need to take care of. So I have to do my best to support anybody that needs that extra bit of treatment, support, time off, whatever it is, so that the greater portion of the body can benefit from those things.
I like that mentality a lot. And you really resonated with me because, I grew up with two drug addict parents. And when you're saying like accountability and empathy, like are so close to you on the scale, like I was like, wow, like I've, I felt that because I remember like I always held my parents accountable in that way of like, no, this is not correct. But I also understood what they were going through and empathized with their situation and really always tried to get them the help that they needed while still not accepting poor behavior. And, it is that like that balancing act, but that really resonated with me a lot. And I've never thought of it that way, but it makes complete sense. And I think it is a tricky thing. Like you said, if you have to be careful with calling people out sometimes when you don't know for sure if someone's taking advantage of something or not. And like you said, it's the betterment of the team, of the whole picture, and trying to keep that in perspective when it comes to things. And so I really liked that. I'm kind of at a loss for words, to be honest, because that kind of like hit me at like a little like an internal like spot.
Not intentional. I have never called somebody out saying, "Hey, you're not as damaged as you're playing on."
Yeah.
I know it occurs, and I never will. I mean, I don't have much left time in my career wise, but I never will because I would worry too much that I would cause damage to that person or anybody else that really needed help,
Right.
but was worried that they'd be called out on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. That makes sense. You had talked about how you built a strong command staff around you that reflects your leadership and culture. What conversations do you have and what actions do you do to reinforce that with your team to make sure that the message is consistent and you guys are all on the same page when it comes to wellness and certain initiatives within the organization?
Yeah. What's really good about the people that I work around is that we all have given ourselves basically permission to not agree when we're having our really deep discussions related to strategy or policy or
Mhm.
philosophy. So while I look at the people that I work around as really strong leaders, that yes, we're all pulling in the same direction for the agency, we're all very different. The two deputy chiefs, for example, we frequently I get outvoted by them on the issues that I don't have a real strong feeling about. I may be leaning one way and they'll convince me that it's a different way we need to go. And that's the type of environment that I think we need to have here. And that's the type of environment I think our future needs
Mhm.
is, and one where you don't have this draconian ruler who is like, it's my way or the highway. That's how I started my career. Everybody I worked with at the beginning of my career was very much in that, in that way, in that type of leadership. But what we have here is a group of men and women that really understand that there's a lot of ways to do this job, and the only wrong way is disregarding people's feelings or leaving boxes unchecked because you think you've done a good enough job, or avoiding the hard work or things like that. We're a very busy agency, and we go through the numbers. We can't even handle all the calls that are asked of us. And a lot of our cases have to go uninvestigated, unfortunately. But we're all very hard workers, and we do our best to prioritize and triage, and recognize what's going on in our coworkers while we're moving along as well. So I ask questions. I get to write the questions now that get asked at these promotional interviews, right? And almost all of them will revolve around the balance between two really difficult things. We were talking about empathy and accountability. There's stuff like that in there. There's lots of things that put the candidate back a little bit, and and they do most of the time do a pretty good job because they've lived within the environment that we've created. I've only been a chief for a couple of years, but before that, I was deputy chief. I grew up in this organization, so we've had an environment, a culture that was created that cares about the human beings that are doing this job, and I think it's noticeable. I think we were on national television on a syndicated docu series, and partly I don't think we lasted very long because we're not a bunch of cowboys. But I think people appreciated our engagement with the various people that come along that we have contact with. And back to your original question, the command staff that we have here, they all kind of believe in what we're doing.
Yeah, I really like the idea of constructive open forums and allowing different perspectives to enter the conversation. And you had said this earlier, and I actually wanted to touch on this. So I'm so glad that you said it again is, having the ability to get out of your own way sometimes and have an open mind to other perspectives, I think is really valuable. And I've, I have personally done both. I've definitely had times in my life where it was my way or no way. I've definitely been that person who has been judgmental of other people and their life experiences or their opinions of things. And I've had to learn and I'm really honestly like, I know that maybe getting older isn't for everyone, but I appreciate the ability to get older because I've learned so much and I've grown so much and I'm so happy that I'm not that person anymore. But I think that, that's from years and years of development to understand that it's not just about you. There are other people who have valuable opinions and valuable things to add to your life and your organization, obviously, is kind of what we're talking about. But I like that idea of getting out of your own way, having an open mind, constructive open forums, and maybe challenging your thought process a little bit. I think that's kind of fun to
Well,
challenge your thought
I think
process.
it's healthy. It's super healthy, right? And I think like you were kind of alluding to this, but I wish I would have known this years and years ago. I think I would have lived a much healthier life if I wasn't so built up and wrapped up in oh, that person did this or that did that, and I don't agree with this or I don't agree with that. Um, as I look at it now, I'm like, who cares? It's like, who cares?
Yeah.
It's you don't have to agree. You can even be in the same room. Like we don't have a world right now where you can disagree. Everybody's at other ends of the spectrum, and you're supposed to hate the person that disagrees with you. But I don't believe in that at all. And it's I joke around with people that I'm getting softer. It's only partially joking. I'm softening on my extreme passion that I had, and maybe it's a cop thing, right? But my extreme passion I had, and if it didn't work this way or didn't go this way, I let it live rent free in my brain for way too long. And it impacted my relationships. It probably impacted my ability to have relationships with people that I never really got to know because I either judged them or just disagreed so much with what they were saying that I didn't give myself an opportunity to know them deeper at their core.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about this. Like I said, this command staff is we all kind of think the same thing, and we give people the room they need to grow and develop. And honestly, I started this job, less than 2 years ago, this police chief job, to plan it for my replacement in true Stephen Covey fashion, right? Begin with the end in mind. And I know that there's a lot of people that are going to come on and take this organization to the very next level because they're going to have the freedom to do it. And they're building habits today to take charge.
Yeah. What do you want your legacy to be when you do leave this profession?
Man, it's such an interesting and difficult question. I don't really ever think about my legacy. I guess if I were to translate it a little bit, what do I want to? What am I most proud of? What do I want? I think I would maybe going back to some of the things we talked about earlier is that I allowed myself to really get to know the men and women that work here, and that to the extent I could instill in them that I was doing the best I can with it, within the rules of doing and managing the business of policing, to think about them, to care about what their wishes are, and still work within the boundaries, right? And then even, I guess, to kind of take it to the next step is that on top of leading that way, that I also cared about what they thought and cared enough to step out of the office and go spend time with them, whether it was responding to a really hot call or being in the middle of an investigation so that I could provide the support that they needed to do what I think is the hardest job, which is being out there and driving around the community in the middle of the night when nobody else is around.
Thank you. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way. Words for the younger generation.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll talk broadly, and then I'll talk, or do it the other way around. I'll talk like I was talking to myself, and then maybe talking more broadly, because just like we were talking about earlier, everybody needs a little bit different type of advice. For me, in younger parts of my career, would be just what we were already touching on: is just don't take things so seriously, right? Spend time looking beyond what you're seeing. Look for reason. Years ago, I read Oprah Winfrey's book on what happened to you, right? And it was the whole divide between what cops commonly do, like what's wrong with you, with this better understanding of what happened to you. What did you experience to be the way you are? It takes a lot of the judgment out of sometimes what you can experience as a younger cop going to an incident that you've never been involved in, never had happen to you, and be judgmental, like what's wrong with you? How do you let yourself become a victim in this way? How do you let this man abuse you for years and you never get out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, when you understand maybe some of the history with this person and what they experienced as they went through life, it makes a little more sense on how they got inside this trap and didn't feel confident enough to fight their way out of it. So I think it really comes back to making sure, I would tell myself, be careful, how much judgment you have. Take a second to really understand some of the really extreme nuances that occur in people's lives that lead them sometimes to the worst day in their life. And I think broadly, if I were to talk more broadly to all young cops, is continue to learn. Don't ever stop. Don't think you went to the academy or you got a degree with letters behind your name or whatever it is. I mean, things are constantly evolving. And I feel like as a department, we have constantly evolved and looked what was out there and tried to take things on. I'm certainly been a lifelong learner myself. So I wouldn't have to tell my younger self that, but I would tell our younger population is like, take advantage of our tuition reimbursement. Go to that training that gets offered, but you don't think it's something you'd be interested in, and open your mind to learn something that you'd never considered before.
Thank you. I enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I really appreciate your time and your words of wisdom. That is all I have for you. But if there's anything else that you want to add before we sign off for the day, I'll let you take the floor. But just thank you.
No, I'm flattered I got asked. I was glad to have a few minutes chatting with you and anybody else who's listening about kind of our approach here. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. We'll stay in touch.